Chapter 1. The Blind Artist of Crimson Alley. The biting wind of late autumn clawed at Ilara Vance's threadbare coat as she navigated the labyrinthine streets of the city. Her art restoration studio, a small, dusty sanctuary tucked away above a bustling cafe, barely covered her rent, let alone the stack of overdue bills. Yet, despite the gnawing anxieties, Ilara possessed an unyielding spirit, a warmth that shone through her weary eyes. She believed in beauty, in the stories art told, and in the inherent goodness of people even when life itself tested that conviction. One particularly bleak Tuesday, a persistent drizzle blurring the city lights into impressionistic smudges, Ilara took a shortcut through Crimson Alley, a forgotten nook known for its peeling graffiti and hushed whispers. It was there she first saw him. He sat on an upturned crate, oblivious to the rain that plastered strands of dark hair to his pale forehead. His canvas, propped against a grimy brick wall, was a stark contrast to his surroundings, vibrant, alive, an explosion of colour and form that pulsed with raw, untamed energy. But what truly struck Ilara was the way his long, artistic fingers moved, not with the focused intensity of sight, but with an almost ethereal grace, guided by something deeper. His eyes, she soon realised, were milky white, unseeing. Caelan Thorne was a name she would learn later, but in that moment, he was simply the blind artist. He worked with charcoal and a box of worn pastels, sketching figures that seemed to leap from the page, faces etched with forgotten histories, landscapes imbued with a haunting, otherworldly glow. Ilara, an artist herself, albeit one more accustomed to mending the past than creating new worlds, felt an immediate magnetic pull. There was a profound loneliness in his posture, a stillness that spoke of a hidden storm. She watched him for a long time, the rhythmic scratch of charcoal against canvas, a quiet melody in the noisy city. He was drawing a woman, a face, delicate yet strong, framed by cascades of dark hair, with eyes that held the depth of ancient oceans. Ilara's breath hitched. There was an uncanny familiarity in the portrait, a resonance that prickled her skin. It was as if she were looking into a fragmented mirror, a reflection she hadn't known existed. The rain intensified, mirroring the sudden chill that snaked through her veins, a premonition she couldn't quite decipher. Finally he paused, his hand hovering over the finished piece. He seemed to sense her presence then, his head tilting slightly, his sightless gaze sweeping past her, yet somehow lingering. A flicker of something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps an ancient weariness, crossed his gaunt features. "It's breathtaking," Ilara found herself saying, her voice a soft tremor against the urban cacophony. He didn't flinch, didn't smile. His lips, thin and chapped, barely moved. "You see it," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly tone, like stones shifting in a riverbed. It wasn't a question. "I do," she replied, stepping closer, ignoring the grime on the alley floor. "Who is she?" His gaze, though unfocused, seemed to intensify, fixing on a point just beyond her. "My dream," he said, the words hanging heavy in the damp air. "The woman who appears in the quiet hours." He reached out a hand, not toward her, but towards the canvas, tracing the outline of the woman's face with a delicate reverence that spoke of profound longing. Ilara felt an inexplicable pang in her chest, a strange mix of sorrow and recognition. The rain began to ease, leaving behind a glistening sheen on the cobblestones. The city lights, once smudged, sharpened into vibrant jewels. In the sudden quiet, Caelan's next words, though soft, seemed to reverberate in the very core of her being. "Sometimes I wonder if she is real." Elara looked from the hauntingly beautiful portrait to the blind artist, a man shrouded in mystery and pain, and a strange, unshakable certainty bloomed within her. The world she knew was far stranger than she had ever imagined. Chapter 2. A Glimmer of Sanctuary. Elara couldn't shake the image of Caelan Thorne or the enigmatic portrait from her mind. For days, the blind artist haunted her thoughts, a silent, powerful presence that eclipsed her own worries. His vulnerability, coupled with the astonishing power of his art, stirred something deep within her. A protective instinct, perhaps, or a nascent curiosity she couldn't ignore. She found herself revisiting Crimson Alley, day after day, under the pretense of running errands, her heart quickening each time she neared his usual spot. He was always there, a stoic figure amidst the urban decay, his charcoal scratching out new worlds from thin air. He rarely spoke, offering only terse replies to the few passers-by who dared to approach, mostly tourists intrigued by the novelty of a blind street artist. But with Elara, there was a subtle shift. He didn't acknowledge her directly, yet she felt his awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of her consistent presence. She would leave him small parcels of food, a warm pastry from the cafe below her studio, a thermos of hot tea, placing them gently beside his crate before disappearing back into the bustling street. He never refused, though she never saw him eat. The packages would simply be gone the next time she passed. One evening, as dusk bled into night, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a fierce storm descended without warning. The wind howled, whipping rain into a violent frenzy, and the alley transformed into a churning river. Elara, caught unawares, instinctively sought shelter under a crumbling awning. Her gaze immediately flew to Caelan. He remained seated, unmoving, his sparse belongings soaked, his long hair plastered to his face, water streaming down his cheeks, indistinguishable from tears. He looked impossibly fragile, yet his hands still clutched a worn sketchbook, shielding it from the deluge. A fierce resolve solidified in Elara. She couldn't leave him there, not in this. Taking a deep breath, she walked directly up to him, the rain soaking her to the bone. "Caelan," she said, her voice firm despite the roaring wind. "You can't stay here. You'll get sick." He didn't respond, his face a mask of stoic endurance. "I have a studio nearby," she pressed, her voice softening. "There's a small room. It's not much, but it's warm and dry, just for tonight." She knew she was being impulsive, perhaps foolish, but something in his utter helplessness, combined with the raw, untamed power in his art, compelled her. He slowly raised his head, his sightless eyes turning towards the sound of her voice. The flicker of weariness Elara had seen before was now a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "I am fine," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "No, you're not," Elara insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. She reached for his arm, her fingers brushing against his cold, damp skin. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. He tensed, but didn't pull away. "Please, just for tonight. Consider it a trade for the inspiration your art has given me." A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the relentless drumming of the rain. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Caelan nodded. It was a minuscule gesture, yet it felt like a monumental surrender. Elara helped him gather his few waterlogged belongings, carefully shielding his sketchbook. Guiding his reluctant steps through the treacherous alleyways, she led him to her studio, the familiar scent of turpentine and old paper, a comforting balm against the storm outside. The small room she offered him was spare, containing only a narrow cot, a worn rug, and a single window overlooking the city. But it was dry, and it was warm, As he settled in, a strange quiet descended between them. Kaelin sat on the edge of the cot, his head bowed, the water dripping from his hair onto the wooden floor. Ilara, hesitant, brought him a thick, dry towel and a fresh cup of tea. She watched him, mesmerized by the delicate curve of his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands. There was a fragile vulnerability beneath his cold exterior, a hint of something broken, something yearning. "Thank you," he finally whispered, his voice hoarse, the first genuine gratitude she had heard from him. Ilara simply offered a small, tentative smile. The storm outside raged, but within the small, shared space of her studio, a fragile sense of sanctuary began to bloom, an unexpected warmth against the encroaching chill of the world. She had offered him shelter, but she sensed, with a growing certainty, that she had opened her door to far more than just a man. Chapter 3. The portrait's echo days turned into weeks, and Kaelin Thorne, the blind artist of Crimson Alley, became an unexpected fixture in Ilara's life. He was a man of routines, of silence. He spent his days in the small room Ilara had offered, or sometimes in a corner of her studio, his fingers ceaselessly sketching, sculpting unseen forms from clay, or painting on canvases he oriented by touch. The studio, once a solitary space, now thrummed with a quiet, unspoken energy, an undercurrent of mystery and nascent connection. Ilara learned his habits, his preference for dark tea, his aversion to loud noises, the way his fingers, when not drawing, would often trace the patterns on the worn wooden table, as if mapping an invisible world. He remained guarded, his words sparse, his emotions carefully shielded behind an impenetrable wall. Yet, Ilara began to see beyond the cold facade. She noticed the slight tilt of his head when she hummed a tune, the subtle clench of his jaw when she spoke of her struggles, a fleeting tension that hinted at a deeper, hidden empathy. There was a profound wisdom in his silence, an ancient sorrow in his unseeing eyes. One crisp afternoon, a thin shaft of sunlight piercing through the dust motes dancing in the studio, Ilara was meticulously restoring a faded Baroque painting when she noticed Kaelin had been unusually quiet. She looked over, and her breath caught in her throat. He was working on a large canvas, his hands moving with a fierce, almost desperate intensity. The air around him seemed to crackle with an invisible energy. The painting was magnificent, a symphony of rich blues and silvers depicting a woman. It was that woman, the one from Crimson Alley, the woman of his dreams. But this time, the details were astonishingly precise, vibrant, almost hyper-real. Her eyes, those deep ocean eyes, seemed to gaze directly at Ilara, filled with an unsettling familiarity. Her dark hair cascaded over shoulders, a familiar posture, a curve of the neck that made Ilara's heart pound with an inexplicable beat. As Kaelin added the final strokes, his fingers barely grazing the canvas, the sunlight shifted, falling directly onto the painting, illuminating the woman's face with an ethereal glow, and in that moment, Ilara saw it. The mole just above the left corner of the woman's mouth, the slight asymmetry of her smile, a faint scar near her eyebrow, a detail Ilara knew only too well, a memento from a childhood misadventure. It was her, it was her face, impossibly rendered by a man who had never seen her. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound that seemed to shatter the profound silence of the studio. Kaelin froze, his hand still suspended in the air, his head snapped up, his blind eyes sweeping across the room, as if suddenly sensing a profound disturbance in the fabric of reality. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice laced with an unfamiliar tremor, a raw note of fear and confusion. Ilara couldn't speak. She felt a dizzying rush, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. She stumbled backward, bumping into a stack of canvases. the sound echoing unnaturally loud. Her gaze was locked on the painting, then on Kaelin's face, a terrible, thrilling realization dawning on her. This wasn't just a dream, it was a mirror, a manifestation. Kaelin, hearing her distress, slowly reached out, his hand groping blindly for something, anything. "What is it?" he asked, his voice strained. "What do you see?" Elara finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "The woman in your painting, Kaelin, she's me." His hand dropped, falling heavily to his side. His face, usually so composed, crumpled. A shadow of profound terror, an ancient, unspeakable dread flickered across his features. His breath hitched, ragged and shallow. He looked utterly devastated, as if the very foundations of his world had just crumbled. The air grew heavy, electric. The fantasy, once a mere whisper, solidified into an undeniable, terrifying truth. The painting, bathed in the fading sunlight, seemed to pulse. Its eyes, her eyes, staring back, holding a secret that was both beautiful and terrifying. Kaelin, the blind artist, had not just dreamt her, he had somehow impossibly seen her, and in doing so, had etched her into existence, revealing a connection that defied all reason. Chapter 4. Whispers of a Cursed Past. The revelation hung between them like a fragile, volatile thread. Kaelin, his face ashen, stumbled back from the canvas as if it were a burning entity. He retreated into the corner of the room, his long fingers pressing against his temples, as if trying to push away an unbearable truth. Elara, still reeling, watched him, her initial shock slowly giving way to a profound sense of awe and a growing, unsettling fear. How could this be? How could a blind man, whom she had only recently met, have painted her with such uncanny precision? "Kaelin," she ventured, her voice soft, attempting to bridge the chasm that had suddenly opened between them. "Please, tell me, how did you do this?" He flinched, his body rigid. "I don't know," he choked out, his voice raw with a pain Elara hadn't heard before. "It's a curse, a gift. I see visions, faces, worlds." His fingers trembled as he gestured vaguely, his sightless gaze fixed on some inner torment. "They come to me in darkness, and sometimes they manifest." Elara's mind raced. A curse, visions, manifestations. It was madness, and yet the painting was undeniably real, undeniably her. Her rational mind screamed for logic, but her heart, captivated by the sheer impossibility of it all, urged her to believe. She cautiously approached him, kneeling down, her presence a gentle anchor in his distress. "Kaelin, you're safe here. Whatever this is, whatever you're hiding, you can tell me." Her gaze swept across his face, noticing the subtle lines of old pain etched around his mouth, the faint tremor in his hands. He wasn't just a blind artist, he was a man, burdened by an extraordinary, terrifying secret. He took a ragged breath, the sound rasping in the sudden quiet of the studio. "I am not from here, Elara," he began, his voice barely a whisper. A tale spun from ancient shadows. "Not truly. I was once a master artisan in a realm far from this one, a place where art was not merely representation, but creation, where brushstrokes could weave reality." He paused, a deep shudder running through his frame. "But I abused the gift, sought forbidden knowledge, dared to paint that which should not be awakened." Elara listened, captivated, her own breathing shallow. The world outside, the familiar city, seemed to recede, replaced by the fantastical narrative unfolding before her. "As punishment," he continued, his voice laced with bitterness, "I was exiled, stripped of my sight, my memory fractured, cast into this world. My gift, it became a curse. Now I paint what I feel, what I glimpse in the fragments of memory, and sometimes, what I paint takes on a life of its own. He lifted his head, his blind eyes, though unfocused, seeming to pierce through her very soul. You are a vision I have carried for years, a solace in the darkness. I thought you were merely the embodiment of my deepest longing, a dream too perfect to be real. But you are here, you are tangible, and now I am afraid. His fear was palpable, a chilling wave that washed over Elara. He wasn't afraid of her, she realized, but of the implications of her physical presence, of what it meant for his curse, for his precarious existence in this world. He was a being of magic and sorrow, disguised as a desolate, blind man. Elara reached out, gently placing her hand over his trembling one. His skin was cold, but beneath it she felt the frantic pulse of a heart burdened by ancient secrets. "Afraid of what, Kaelin?" she asked, her voice steady, though her own heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Afraid of me, or afraid of what your art has truly accomplished?" He squeezed her hand, a surprising strength in his grip. "Afraid of the forces that might follow," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the painting of her face. "Afraid that my curse might bring harm to you, the one soul who has shown me kindness in this desolate exile. Afraid that my dream, becoming real, might shatter us both." The unspoken weight of his words filled the studio. Elara looked from his tormented face to the portrait, a masterpiece born of sorrow and magic, a silent testament to a love story unfolding across realms. She knew, with a certainty that defied all reason, that she was inextricably linked to this man, to his curse, and to the extraordinary, dangerous truth of his art. Chapter 5. The Unveiling Shadow. The revelation of Kaelin's true origin as an exiled artisan from another realm, cursed with blindness and the power to manifest his art, deepened the chasm between the fantastical and the mundane in Elara's life. Yet, instead of fear driving her away, a fierce determination took root. She felt an almost primal urge to protect him, to understand his plight, to be an anchor in the storm of his fragmented reality. Their bond, initially one of simple compassion, had evolved into something profound and intricate, woven with threads of magic and an undeniable growing affection. She spent hours listening to Kaelin, piecing together the fragments of his past. He spoke of a vibrant, iridescent world, a realm of pure creation, where beings wove existence itself through art. He described his transgression, a desperate attempt to paint his way back to a lost love, an act of defiance against the very laws of his world, which led to his banishment and the twisting of his gift into a formidable, unpredictable curse. He spoke of the fear of being discovered, not just by his past, but by the watchful eyes of this human world which would never comprehend his nature. Elara's studio, once her sanctuary, now became their shared haven, a place where the impossible felt increasingly real. She learned to discern the subtle shifts in Kaelin's mood, the stories his hands told when his lips remained sealed. She saw past the cold exterior, glimpsing the tender, yearning soul beneath, a soul that had endured unimaginable loss and loneliness. Their unspoken connection, however, did not go unnoticed. One blustery afternoon, as Elara was hanging a newly restored landscape, the bell above her studio door chimed, announcing a visitor. A woman stood on the threshold, enveloped in a luxurious crimson velvet coat, her striking features framed by an impossibly coiffed blonde bob. Her eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, surveyed the studio with an air of aristocratic disdain before settling on Kaelin, who sat quietly by the window, sketching. "Kaelin," the woman purred, her voice like cut glass, cold and sharp. "It has been far too long." Kaelin froze, his hand clenching around his charcoal. His face, usually pale, grew ashen. A shiver, not of cold but of dread, rippled through him. Ilara sensed the shift immediately, the sudden tension in the room, the palpable fear emanating from him. "Who are you?" Ilara asked, stepping forward, instinctively placing herself between the newcomer and Kaelin. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered. The woman's gaze flickered to Ilara, a dismissive sneer gracing her perfect lips. "And who, pray tell, is this?" She took a step into the studio, her expensive heels clicking loudly on the wooden floor. "My name is Lysandra, and Kaelin, here, is mine." The possessiveness in her tone, the veiled threat in her eyes sent a chill down Ilara's spine. Kaelin, as if roused from a trance, finally spoke, his voice a low growl, devoid of his usual quiet dignity. "Lysandra, you should not be here." "Oh, but I should," Lysandra countered, her eyes gleaming with malice. She walked directly to Kaelin's easel, her manicured finger tracing the outline of the portrait of Ilara. Her laughter, high and tinkling, filled the room. The famed painter of reality, now reduced to sketching pathetic imitations of mortals, and a blind one at that. She turned to Ilara, her gaze dripping with contempt. "So, you are the latest muse. How utterly quaint, or perhaps the latest unwitting pawn in his pathetic attempt to escape his fate." Lysandra's words were barbed, cutting deep. Ilara felt a surge of anger, but also a growing unease. Lysandra knew about Kaelin's curse, about his origins. She wasn't just a scorned lover, she was something more, something dangerous. "What do you want?" Ilara demanded, her voice firm, unwavering. She might be outmatched in elegance and pedigree, but she wouldn't back down. Lysandra's smile broadened, a predatory flash. "I want what is owed, Kaelin's power, his art, his very essence. His curse was a blessing in disguise, a tool to be wielded, not squandered on mundane portraits and human playthings." Her eyes glinted. "He belongs to me, Ilara, and if he continues to defy the ancient pacts, if he continues to create new realities with his errant brushstrokes, then the consequences will be catastrophic, not just for him, but for anyone foolish enough to stand in his shadow." The implication hung heavy in the air, a chilling threat. Ilara looked from the venomous Lysandra to Kaelin, whose face was now a mask of profound despair. The fantastical elements of his story were no longer distant whispers. They were a tangible, terrifying force, embodied by the chilling elegance of Lysandra. His past, it seemed, had finally caught up, and it was threatening to consume them both. Chapter 6. A World Apart, a Love Divided. Lysandra's chilling pronouncements shattered the fragile peace of Ilara's studio. Her presence, sharp and venomous, left an indelible mark, revealing the true stakes of Kaelin's existence. He was not just a blind artist with a magical gift. He was a being of immense power, ensnared by ancient pacts and pursued by forces that transcended their mundane world. The gravity of his curse, which now threatened to engulf Ilara, settled heavily in the air. After Lysandra's dramatic exit, leaving behind a lingering scent of expensive perfume and menace, Kaelin retreated into himself. He paced the small confines of his room, a caged animal, his frustration and fear a palpable storm. Ilara tried to reach him, her gentle words met with a wall of silence. His usual quietude had transformed into an agonizing, self-imposed isolation. "Kaelin, please talk to me," she pleaded, finding him huddled in a corner, his face buried in his hands. What did she mean? Ancient pacts, catastrophic consequences. He slowly lifted his head, his blind eyes filled with a raw, agonizing sorrow that tore at Ilara's heart. "Lysandra was my betrothed in my old world," he confessed, his voice hoarse, laden with regret. "A powerful sorceress, a weaver of illusions. We were to unite our gifts, merge our powers to ascend to a forbidden tier of creation. He let out a bitter laugh. I was blinded by ambition, by a desperate desire to resurrect what was lost. My curse was meant to be a tether, a way for her to control my power, my art. She believes my manifestations are her right, her property to exploit. But I'm not a manifestation for her. Elara insisted, her voice tight. I'm real, I'm me. Kaelan reached out, his hand hovering near her face, as if confirming her tangibility. Yes, he whispered, a tear finally tracing a path down his cheek. You are real, my greatest dream, brought to life through my curse, yet untainted by her manipulations. That is why she is here. Your existence, it threatens her claim. It makes me truly free, but also more vulnerable to her wrath. He then revealed the full horror of his situation. Lysandra, he explained, was a conduit for a darker power, a manipulative entity that fed on raw creation. His curse, meant to bind him, had become a conduit for Lysandra to access his abilities. But Elara's spontaneous manifestation, a pure act of creation born from longing, had created a ripple effect, disrupting Lysandra's control, weakening the ancient pacts and making Kaelan a target for both Lysandra and the shadowy forces she served. If he continued to paint, especially if he painted her, the resultant uncontrolled magic could tear open the fabric between worlds, unleashing chaos. I have to go, Elara, he declared, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. I cannot stay. My presence here, my art, it endangers you. It endangers this entire world. He stood, his movements stiff, as if bracing himself for an invisible blow. You are the purest thing I have ever created, the most beautiful truth I have ever known. I cannot bear for you to be caught in the storm that follows me. Elara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. The logical part of her knew he was right, that his departure was necessary for her safety, for the world's safety. But her heart, now irrevocably intertwined with his, screamed in protest. No, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. You can't just leave. Not after all of this. Not after you painted me into existence. He turned, his blind eyes searching for her, finding her through some unseen connection. You were already there, Elara, he corrected, his voice thick with emotion. In my heart, in my soul. I merely gave form to what already existed, and because of that, because I care for you more than I have cared for anything in countless ages, I must leave. I must go to protect you. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, a ghost of a touch that sent shivers through her. Forget me, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Forget the impossible. Live your life, unburdened by my curse, by my fractured world. But as he spoke the words, Elara knew it was impossible. How could she forget the man who had seen her in his dreams, who had painted her soul, who was now leaving her to protect her from the very magic that had brought them together? As he turned and silently began to gather his meagre belongings, the studio, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now echoed with the unbearable silence of a love divided, a world apart. Chapter 7. The Unseen Divide. Kaelan's departure was not a dramatic exit, but a slow, agonizing unravelling. Despite Elara's fervent pleas, her arguments that their connection transcended the dangers, he remained resolute. He packed his worn sketchbook, his box of charcoals and pastels, and the simple clothes he had arrived in, the painting of Elara, the one that had started it all, he left behind, carefully propped against the wall as a poignant, silent farewell. This is not a choice, Elara, he had said, his voice flat with resolve, the mask of coldness firmly back in place, though his trembling hands betrayed the depth of his internal struggle. It is a necessity. My cursed power, left unchecked, will eventually draw more than just Lysandra. It will tear at the very fabric of your world. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. He walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, a solitary figure swallowed by the city's indifferent sprawl. Ilara stood at the studio window, watching him disappear, her heart a raw, bleeding wound. The silence he left behind was deafening, amplified by the lingering scent of charcoal and the haunting presence of her own portrait. Days bled into weeks, each one a testament to Kaelin's absence. The studio felt empty, lifeless, despite Ilara's efforts to fill it with her own work. The colours she mixed seemed dull, the brushstrokes heavy. Every piece of art she touched felt hollow, without his ethereal presence, without the knowledge that somewhere a blind artist had seen her soul and given it form. The city, once vibrant, now seemed a muted, monochrome landscape. Ilara walked its streets, her gaze unconsciously searching for him in every shadowed alley, every street performer's corner, knowing it was futile. He had simply vanished, an impossible man returning to an impossible past. But his words, his warnings about his curse and Lysandra's power, gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that his departure, though meant to protect her, had left her more vulnerable, more exposed. Lysandra's threat had not been merely to Kaelin, it had been to anyone in his shadow, and Ilara, the girl in his painting, was surely etched into that shadow. Then came the incidents, small at first, seemingly unconnected. Objects in her studio would shift positions when she wasn't looking. A faint scent of exotic, unfamiliar spices would briefly waft through the air. Once she woke to find a perfectly formed, crystalline flower resting on her bedside table, dissolving into shimmering dust as her fingers brushed it. These weren't mundane occurrences, they were whispers from another realm, echoes of Kaelin's magic, or perhaps Lysandra's insidious presence. Ilara's friends, noticing her increasing distraction and the subtle strangeness of her studio, offered concerned glances and veiled questions. Her landlord, an elderly, superstitious woman, began speaking of bad energy emanating from her floor. Society, in its mundane way, started to press in, judging her, questioning her sanity. One afternoon, Ilara returned to her studio to find a message etched onto her mirror in what looked like solidified moonlight. He cannot protect you forever, little muse. The threads he wove will unravel you. Come to me, and perhaps I will spare your fragile world. The signature was a stylized L, Lysandra. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a confirmation. Kaelin hadn't simply left, he was fighting somewhere against something vast and dark, and Ilara was now directly in the crosshairs. She looked at her portrait, the one Kaelin had painted, her own eyes staring back at her, filled with a newfound strength and defiance. She had been hurt, yes, but not broken. Ilara was not one to be easily wounded, nor one to cower. His departure had left her aching, but it had also ignited a spark of fierce resolve. She knew Kaelin believed he was protecting her by leaving, by severing their ties. But she was not a passive dream, a mere figment of his art. She was real, alive, and she would not let him face his demons alone. The time for yearning was over. The time for fighting had begun. Chapter 8. The Price of Creation. Ilara refused to be a pawn in Lysandra's cruel game, nor a damsel waiting for a blind artist to return. The cryptic message on her mirror solidified her resolve. She would find Kaelin, and she would fight alongside him, whatever the cost. Her journey began with desperate research, poring over ancient texts in forgotten libraries, seeking out esoteric art historians, hunting for any mention of mythical painters or reality-bending art. The more she delved, the more the fantastical underpinnings of Kaelin's story began to resonate with fragmented legends and half-forgotten lore. The strange occurrences in her studio escalated. Her brushes would paint on their own, leaving bizarre, unsettling images. The light would flicker, casting unsettling shadows. She knew Lysandra was testing her, taunting her, trying to lure her out. But Ilara, outwardly calm and composed, meticulously tracked the subtle, magical signatures she discerned, the patterns of Lysandra's malevolent energy, using her intuition and the residual magic from Kaelin's painting as a guide. Her relentless pursuit led her to an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of the city, a place shrouded in urban legend, rumoured to be a nexus of strange energies. The air itself thrummed with a palpable magic as Ilara stepped inside, the moonlight filtering through the shattered dome, painting the dust-filled interior in eerie silver. She found Kaelin there, chained, suspended above a swirling vortex of iridescent light and shadow. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his body was racked with shivers, as if every ounce of his energy was being drained from him. He was sketching furiously, his blind hands moving instinctively, creating frantic, desperate images on scraps of paper scattered around him, as if trying to paint his way out of his torment. And standing over him, her face a mask of triumphant malice, was Lysandra. She wore an elaborate gown woven from shimmering dark silk, her eyes glowing with an unnatural, hungry light. She was drawing Kaelin's power, feeding on his raw creation, using his curse as a conduit. So the little muse finally arrives, Lysandra purred, her voice echoing unnaturally in the vast, empty space. I confess, I didn't think you had the courage or the intellect. Her gaze swept over Ilara, a flicker of something akin to admiration, quickly replaced by disdain. You've been quite tenacious, tracing my energy signature. Impressive for a mortal. Let him go, Lysandra, Ilara demanded, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her heart. She was terrified, but a primal fire of defiance burned within her. Lysandra laughed, a chilling, joyless sound. And why should I? His power is mine, always has been. He merely strayed. This little curse of his, this ability to manifest his pathetic longing, was meant to be my tool, a conduit to shape worlds as I see fit. But then you appeared, a glitch in the weave, a pure creation, unbidden, unchained, disrupting the entire design. She gestured to Kaelin, his body now convulsing. Every time he paints you, every time he thinks of you, he pours more energy into you, into this world, weakening my hold and accelerating his demise. Ilara's gaze locked onto Kaelin's tortured face. He was suffering, his magic being twisted and siphoned. You're killing him, she whispered, her voice laced with outrage. A necessary sacrifice. Lysandra shrugged, her eyes gleaming. The price of creation, little muse. This is a realm of infinite possibilities, and Kaelin's ability to pull from it is invaluable. I merely refine the process. She took a step closer to Ilara, her smile predatory. But perhaps I could make you a deal. Your connection to him is strong. You are the purest manifestation of his power. Join me. Let me harness your essence, your link to him, and together we can reshape this dreary world, starting with Kaelin's heart. Ilara stared at her, then back at Kaelin, whose blind eyes, though unfocused, seemed to be pleading with her. Lysandra was offering her a choice: to betray Kaelin, to become a tool of his tormentor, or to stand by him, knowing it would likely mean their combined destruction. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, an agonizing dilemma between self-preservation and an impossible love. But as her gaze met Kaelin's, a silent understanding passed between them, a desperate plea and a defiant promise. Chapter 9. The Reckoning of Realms. Ilara's answer to Lysandra's insidious offer was swift and unwavering. "Never!" she declared, her voice ringing with fierce defiance, a stark contrast to the echoing silence of the observatory. "I will never betray him, and I will never let you use either of us for your twisted ambitions." Lysandra's perfect features contorted into a mask of pure fury. "Foolish mortal, you have no idea of the forces you trifle with." With a wave of her hand, a torrent of dark energy erupted, sending Ilara flying backward, slamming her against a cold metal console. Pain exploded through her, but she pushed through it, her gaze fixed on Kaelin, who was writhing, his muffled cries tearing at her soul. "Kaelin!" she screamed, struggling to her feet. "Fight her! Don't let her take your art!" Lysandra merely laughed, a sound like shattering ice. "He is too weak, too broken. His compassion, his love for you has been his ultimate undoing." She intensified the energy draining from Kaelin, his form flickering as if his very essence was being consumed. A primal scream tore from Ilara's throat, a desperate surge of protective anger. She knew she couldn't match Lysandra's power, but she possessed something Lysandra clearly underestimated: an unbreakable will, a mind that could see patterns, and a heart ignited by a love that defied logic. Her eyes darted around the observatory, searching for any weakness, any crack in Lysandra's impenetrable facade. Her gaze landed on a large, ancient telescope, its lenses still focused on the shattered dome, on the sliver of moonlight filtering through. The moonlight, Ilara remembered, that had magically etched Lysandra's threat onto her mirror, light, pure and untainted, against Lysandra's dark magic. Kaelin's art was creation, Lysandra's was corruption. "Your power feeds on shadows, Lysandra," Ilara stated, her voice suddenly calm, steady. "But Kaelin's art, it is light, it is creation, and it is stronger than your ancient pacts." Lysandra faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "What nonsense are you babbling?" Ilara ignored her. She focused on Kaelin, on the raw, unbridled energy emanating from him, despite his weakened state. He was still creating, still drawing, subconsciously, instinctively. His hands were moving, frantic, capturing the swirling vortex beneath him, the chains that bound him, Lysandra's menacing form. "Kaelin!" Ilara shouted, forcing herself to move, to stand before the telescope, despite the searing pain in her side. "Paint the truth, paint your freedom, paint a world where she has no power." At her words, Kaelin's head snapped up. His blind eyes, though still unfocused, seemed to hold a newfound determination. He took a ragged breath, and then, with a surge of desperate strength, he focused his trembling hands on a pristine sheet of paper. He began to draw, not the dark, desperate images of his torment, but something new, something vibrant. He was sketching Ilara, not as she was now, but as she had appeared in his first dream, radiant and whole, radiating kindness and fierce love. And around her he sketched a protective aura, a shield of pure, unadulterated light. As Kaelin sketched, the air in the observatory thickened, crackling with an immense, surging energy. The vortex beneath him, previously dark and corrupting, began to shift, tinged with a luminous silver light. Lysandra screamed, a sound of pure agony. "Stop him! He's breaking the connection. He's painting a new reality." She launched a fresh assault of dark magic, but Ilara stood her ground, using her own fierce will, her love for Kaelin as a shield. She felt the impact, felt her body falter, but she clung to the telescope, focusing its shattered lenses towards the moonlight, towards Kaelin's desperate artistry. Kaelin, guided by Ilara's voice, by the burgeoning light, poured every ounce of his being into his drawing. He was no longer just drawing Ilara, he was drawing a shield of hope, an unyielding love, a defiant break from his curse. With a final, agonizing stroke, he completed the portrait, not just of Ilara, but of a future where his art was free, where their love was a potent force against darkness. As the last line was drawn, a blinding flash of pure ethereal light erupted from Kaelin's canvas, engulfing him, Ilara, and the entire observatory. The chains that bound him shattered. Lysandra shrieked, her form wavering, her power dissolving under the onslaught of pure, unadulterated creation. The observatory shook violently, the air filled with the roar of rending magic, as if two worlds were colliding, two realities tearing apart. Ilara shielded her eyes, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. When the light faded, the observatory was silent. Kaelin lay on the floor, weak but free. Lysandra was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and the faint shimmer of residual dark magic, now dissipating into the dawn. The reckoning had come, and in its wake, an impossible love, forged in the crucible of magic and defiance, had somehow, miraculously, triumphed. Chapter 10. The Masterpiece of Love. The morning after the reckoning, the observatory lay in ruins, a testament to the battle that had transpired between realms. The air still hummed with residual magic, but it was a softer, purer resonance now, tinged with the scent of fresh rain and possibility. Ilara, bruised but whole, knelt beside Kaelin, cradling his head in her lap. He was weak, exhausted, but the torment in his face had vanished, replaced by a profound, serene peace. His blind eyes, though still unseeing, seemed to hold a new internal light. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice hoarse, but stronger than it had been in days. "You saved me. You truly saved me." She ran her fingers through his damp hair, a tender gesture that spoke volumes. "We saved each other, Kaelin," she corrected, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Your art, my belief. Our connection. It was stronger than any curse, any pact." As the sun began to rise, painting the shattered dome in hues of golden rose, Ilara noticed a subtle change in Kaelin. His features, though still pale, seemed less gaunt, imbued with a new-found vitality. He lifted a hand, and for the first time, he looked directly at her, his blind eyes, once milky white, now a luminous deep amber reflecting the nascent light of the dawn. I can see you," he breathed, wonder dawning on his face, his voice thick with emotion. "Not with my physical eyes, not as a human sees, but through the lens of my art, through the magic of our bond. I see your light, Ilara, your true form, your soul." Tears streamed down Ilara's face, tears of joy, of relief, of a love so profound it defied all earthly bounds. His curse hadn't been entirely lifted, perhaps, but it had been transformed. He was still the blind artist, but now he saw in a way no one else could, seeing the true essence of the world, and most importantly, the true essence of her. Over the next few months, Kaelin's recovery was slow, yet miraculous. His art flourished. No longer a desperate fight against a curse, but a joyful exploration of his unique vision. He continued to paint, but now his canvases vibrated with a gentle, harmonious magic, his figures imbued with a quiet luminescence. He painted the world as he truly perceived it, not just lines and colours, but emotions, energies, the interconnectedness of all things. Their life together was not without its challenges. The world Ilara knew might never fully comprehend Kaelin's origins, or the fantastical elements that intertwined with their love story. But they no longer lived in fear. Lysandra, her power broken, had vanished into the ether, a defeated shadow. The threats from other realms had receded, leaving them in a fragile, yet profound peace. Ilara's studio, rebuilt and revitalized, became a beacon of this new magical reality. Kaelin's art was displayed, attracting a devoted following who saw in his unique perspective a glimpse into something deeper, something beautiful. He continued to paint Elara, but now each portrait was a celebration, a testament to their enduring bond, capturing not just her physical form, but the kindness, strength, and unwavering love that shone within her. One quiet evening, years later, as they sat in their studio, the city lights twinkling outside like scattered diamonds, Kaelin worked on a new canvas. He was painting a landscape, but it wasn't of this world. It was a realm of vibrant, impossible colours, a sky filled with twin moons, and in its centre a magnificent tree, its roots delving deep into the earth, its branches reaching towards the celestial. At its base, two figures stood, hand in hand, their forms radiating a soft, golden light. "It's beautiful," Elara whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Where is this place?" Kaelin smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that reached his luminous amber eyes. "It is where we began, Elara, and it is where we are heading. A place where imagination births reality, where dreams take form, where love is the ultimate masterpiece." He reached out, his hand finding hers, intertwining their fingers. "You are not just the girl from my painting, Elara. You are the brushstroke that completed my world, the color that brought meaning to my canvas, my true masterpiece." The city hummed outside, oblivious to the quiet magic contained within the studio. But Elara knew, as she looked at Kaelin, her blind artist, who saw more than anyone, that their love was not just a story, but a living